We're up here going to talk about civil disobedience today. Civil disobedience is an act of deliberately and peacefully choosing to disobey specific laws or rules in order to promote change. Now, unlike other kinds of activity designed to foster change, such as lobbying, voting, or electoral work, even education, civil disobedience is, as you know, a tactic that runs the risk of getting arrested and sometimes getting caught up even in a violent altercation, depending on the circumstances. The folks participating in civil disobedience usually are not the instigators, but sometimes others are. The history of civil disobedience is often linked to Henry David Thoreau, who in 1846 spent the night in jail because he refused to pay a tax that supported both slavery and the war against Mexico. Thoreau's classic Civil Disobedience suggests that we all need to prioritize our conscience over the dictates of laws. I would imagine all of us recognize that it's much easier to read about civil disobedience. It's much easier to read and ponder Thoreau's classic than it is to participate in it ourselves. And this is why we wanted to take time today, and I asked Dean if he would be willing to participate today so that we can talk about some very concrete actions that Dean has participated in terms of civil disobedience. So this is Dean Hulse of Fargo. I'm Gretchen Harvey of Moorhead, and what we're going to do is use an interview format. I'm going to ask questions that I hope you would be interested in hearing the answers to, and Dean will obviously respond as his experience allows. Now, unfortunately, I don't have Neil Conan's voice or demeanor, but I will do my best. So, Dean, how many times have you participated in civil disobedience actions?
Well, in terms of being arrested, just this once. The images that are flashing on the screen here now are of that day. That was August 24th, 2011. That was part of the, it was done under the banner of Tar Sands Action, but Bill McKibben's group 350.org was instrumental in organizing this. Arrests occurred beginning August 20th and continued through September 3rd every day, and there were on average about 50 people arrested, I guess. The 1,252 were arrested in total. And if I'm hard to recognize, I'm the guy with the glasses and the hat on in this photo. One of the stipulations was don't wear anything to an arrest that you're not going to want to have on for a while, and because I typically wear contacts, the potential of being overnight in jail with contacts, wasn't something I wanted to experience, so I wore glasses, and because I don't have a lot of hair on top of the head to stand out in the sun in the summertime in D.C. was the reason for the hat. So that was just one of the examples of the things that they had to prepare for in terms of risking arrest, was to make sure that we were as prepared as possible to be comfortable. And so that was the only time. I did go back to Washington, D.C. This year on President's Day and took part in the President's Day rally for climate action, where an estimated 40,000 people marched by the White House, protesting in particular the Keystone XL pipeline, and there were people there protesting fracking and or hydraulic fracturing, a number of other things. But here locally, there's a lot of good-hearted people that show up for protests, but we laughingly call ourselves the usual suspects, because there's usually a handful of the same ones that show up. And I thought I had the opportunity, and just once I wanted to be in a mass demonstration, and it was certainly that. It was an impressive sight to see 40,000 people walking down Constitution Avenue.
Okay, let's go back to 2011 and deconstruct that particular action a little bit. What made you think that civil disobedience, A, would be effective, but that you wanted to participate in something where you would risk discomfort, arrest, in this particular instance?
Well, there's some of us in the room here that have worked together on campaigns before. Ron Sager sitting over here with me, we spent many hours collecting petition signatures in 2006 to try and amend the Fargo Home Rule Charter so we could get renewable energy in Fargo. And long story short, a lot of the things I've been involved in for the past 10 years that would be considered community organizing have been a failure because we've been outnumbered, outgunned. And part of community organizing involves being able to put pressure on a decision maker. And I had been thinking for a number of years that, at some point we're going to have to start having civil disobedience to make our point. And lo and behold, in the summer of 2011, the Keystone XL pipeline decision was looming. Because this pipeline crosses an international boundary, the State Department is brought into the decision-making process, and ultimately the President of the United States who is the person who makes the decision to approve or reject this pipeline permit. So we had one decision maker to put pressure on, and we knew where he lived. And so the practicality of this appealed to me, and that's why I decided to do it.
Would you share some of the specifics, perhaps, of how you were trained and the actual arrest itself? Were you scared at any time?
This image that's up here now, I don't know if you can see the back of my forearm, but there's numbers written on my forearm. And that was part of the training. I'm kind of not being very chronological here, but anyway, I'll try and get as much of it in as I can. We had a 4-hour training the night before the arrests, and we practiced even marching to the White House, the gate in front of the fence in front of the White House. We practiced even how we would hold our hands because these plastic cuffs can become uncomfortable and cut off circulation, so you try and make your hands big. I don't know how else to describe it, but to resist so they don't pull the straps any tighter than they have to. And we had many, I would say probably an hour of the 4-hour training. There was a representative of the National Lawyers Guild there talking about what we could expect, what we would have. We were told we would have an arrest record after this, but not a conviction record because we'd forfeited bail and details like that. Then the day of the event, we all met in Lafayette Park, which is right across the street from the White House. Those of us willing to risk arrest that day had our names entered on a sheet, so they were very sure that they knew everyone who was going to be there so that we could be easily accounted for. And we marched across the way on Pennsylvania Avenue and stood in front of the White House. And there's an area there that tourists like to come and have their photographs taken. And there's a city ordinance that says you can't block that area. So if you stand or sit without being in motion, you're in violation of the ordinance. So that's what we did, of course. We marched over, and because this was symbolic, we got all together in a nice group photo. That was part of the choreographing of this event. And we stood, and the police, by the third day, were well aware that what was going on. The process had kind of worked out to be smooth by this point. If I remember, I'll talk about something that didn't work out so well the first 2 days. But anyway, we marched across and stood, and there were like bicycle racks that had been laid out along the sides of the street. The park police was the group that had jurisdiction over where this particular infraction occurred. So that was another thing that the Lawyers Guild brought up, that depending on where you're going to do an action, you better make sure you know who is in charge. If we'd have been on the White House grounds, it might have been the Secret Service. So that's a consideration for anyone wanting to risk arrest in the future. You want to figure out who the people are that's going to be arresting you once you're doing your thing. But anyway, we were standing there, and then the park police, well prepared by this point, this was the 4th day into this, came out and said, "You're in violation of your public gathering permit. If you do not disperse, you will be arrested. This is your first warning." And then second warning, third, and then after the third, they cordoned off the area and began arresting people. And then we were processed. Part of the training was, they said, do not bring any jewelry, do not bring any watches, you bring your photo ID, $100, which what the fine was supposed to be, and enough cash to get you a metro ticket to get back to wherever you're staying, and that's all you want to carry. And the rationale was the more things there are on you, the more the police are going to have to catalog, and the longer the process is going to take, the more uncomfortable it's going to be in the vans and things of that nature. Getting back to how smoothly and how important it is to have good communication. The first 2 days, August 20th and 21st, the park police, well, mostly the 20th, which was a Saturday, the park police were operating under the assumption that this same group that got arrested the first day were going to come back every day for the period and be arrested. They didn't understand that it was going to be a new group every day. So they wanted to make an example of the first day's group, and they put them in jail. And because there was no court on Sunday, the first day's arrestees had to spend 2 days in jail. And they were looking at a $500 fine instead of a $100 fine. And this was all coming over the internet, or over the emails. You know, here I am 2 days away from flying into Washington, D.C., and suddenly, $400 more than I was saying. But it worked itself out after the communication was clear to the police that no, there's going to be a different group every day. Then it became pretty systematic. So by the time from when I was arrested till we were processed out was about 2.5 hours.
That kind of raises another question. You know, if anybody's ever thinking about participating in a civil disobedience action, did you kind of do your homework and figure out what 350 was all about? Did you feel comfortable that they knew what they were doing in terms of getting everything in place?
I called a friend of mine who is a defense attorney, and he suggested the name of someone in town who was a member of the National Lawyers Guild. And he got out his directory and gave me the name of a woman in D.C. who worked for a law firm that they did a lot of these types of defenses. And this woman, very generous, she talked to me for a half an hour, laying out all the different things to consider. If you've got a special diet or you're on medication, you better think twice about this, because you're not going to get that if you're in jail. If you have bladder conditions or any sort of medical conditions that make your stamina a question, you might consider wearing an adult diaper. I mean, things as practical as that are things you've got to consider for this. But you know, we're getting short on time here. I'm glad I did it. I would do it again. This was pretty much play acting compared to some of the civil disobedience that I think is going to be forthcoming. We didn't even touch on the Keystone XL pipeline, which is the reason for all of this. If that permit is approved, there will be civil disobedience the length of this continent. And there's a group called Credo that sells mobile phones. They also do social activism. They have solicited online commitments from 40,000 people to participate in civil disobedience if that Keystone pipeline starts being built. So there will be more to come. There's no doubt about that.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the strategy of TransCanada to combat this kind of civil disobedience?
Well, it's already occurring in southern Texas or East Texas. The Keystone XL pipeline is part of a Keystone pipeline system. The first Keystone pipeline is already operating, and it's running through eastern North Dakota. And it originally went to Cushing, Oklahoma, where it stopped. And the goal is to get this oil to the Gulf so it can be sold on the global market. So they are building an extension of the original Keystone pipeline right now through East Texas, and people are chaining themselves to bulldozers. They're sitting in trees, and they're being arrested and slapped with severe bail amounts and spending considerable amount of time in jail. So it's going to get a lot more heated. And if I can, just take one second to read something. The politicians, including those in our own state, Senator Heidi Heitkamp recently has been in favor of this Keystone XL pipeline, and they always want to say that it's for energy independence. Well, to me, that implies that we're going to get some of this oil. This is a quote from Ken Hughes, who's the Alberta Energy Minister, and this appeared in the Edmonton Journal in January of this year. For Alberta, the strategic imperative is that we get our products to the ocean so that we can secure global prices for our products. The solutions are additional pipelines to the West Coast, to the East Coast, to the Gulf Coast, and also train car delivery of bitumen and oil products to the coast. So our energy independence, if we believe this, is going to come at the cost of being the highest bidder for that oil. That's the reality of this pipeline, and it is the most energy intensive, dirtiest petroleum product left on the planet.
Any questions? Yes.
Well, we've had a lot of discussion. This is a somewhat indirect answer, but a lot of focus on the Second Amendment recently because of gun control issues. Well, here's the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to redress the government and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. I don't think that it's hurting my credibility at all. It's my patriotic duty to take part in this. To peaceably assemble is our right and responsibility as American citizens. What you said, the latter, is I think what's the reality. They can't possibly move all that oil by rail. And there is an area slated for development in Alberta that is the size of the state of Florida. And that is on top, or on what sits on top of most of that now is boreal forest, some of the most pristine forest land left. This tar sands has to be mined. It's virtually the consistency of peanut butter. And it has to be either mined like you would mine coal, or you have to inject steam into the ground, or solvents and or hot air to get this stuff out of the ground. It has to be heated in the pipes when it's transported, and there's still sand in it, and the oil itself is more acidic than conventional crude. So the idea that a pipeline is going to long-term be a solution, you're going to have a very shortened life of the pipeline itself. And anyway, if the idea of focusing so much on the Keystone XL pipeline is so we can slow the development and leave that in the ground. Ahmed pointed out earlier today that we had a budget of 500 gigatons of carbon we could still burn, but we've got a reserve of 27, almost 2,800 gigatons. So we're going to have to leave some of this stuff in the ground, and the tar sands in Alberta would be a good place to start. Thanks.